Welcome to the Walking America podcast. Today we're speaking with Kyle and Katrina, owners of a local coffee shop here in Gridley, Illinois. Katrina works the shop, Common Grounds Cafe, delivering ice-cold frappuccinos into the hands of sun-baked vagrants, while Kyle works to provide the beans at Roastery, a not-for-profit whose proceeds go to care for orphans and vulnerable children. Katrina actually met us on the road with an immediate, "Where are you guys staying?" And we spent the better part of the night getting to know one another. I'm joined by my co-hostess, Paige, and I'm your host, a guy with 2 feet and a mouth. Kyle, Katrina, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So this actually isn't the first time that you've played the Russian roulette of inviting travelers into your home. When did that start?
Probably fairly soon after we moved to Gridley. I don't know if we hosted anybody when we were in Quincy.
The last 9 years, I'd say.
Yeah, the last 9 years. Ever since we got married. I've always been very hosty.
Yeah.
We enjoyed it so much, we decided to do Airbnb in our home, and we did that for several years as well.
Yeah, over the past 9 years, we've hosted probably 6 to 8 various groups of people either walking across the country or people that are moving from place to place, hitchhikers, things like that, plus the Airbnb side of things. Mm-hmm. Once a year, twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. Was there a particular thing that kicked it off? Was there a first, hey, that was fun?
Great question. I think we both grew up in extremely hospitable homes, and we were very used to hosting people. With our church family, our youth groups were very connected. So the church we go to has 90 locations across the nation, and the young groups that are associated with those churches travel a lot interstate-wise. So, I would go from my hometown in Bluffton, Indiana, to a church in Gridley, Illinois, and somebody would keep me, and I'd have no clue who they were. And we would reciprocate. People would show up to these young group events, and I'd have no idea who they were, but they were assigned to my house. So we both grew up in that culture of
being very comfortable staying in complete strangers' homes and assuming that
yeah,
they
and
would...
vice versa. You open your home to people, and
right.
you believe the best in them. So that's probably where it started. And then the first time we did it as a couple, it was probably, I would assume it was probably Katrina in a similar situation, seeing somebody walking, offering a place, and then calling me saying, "Hey, we've got somebody coming for dinner," and it just kind of became part of our culture.
At one point, I saw someone in the middle of a blizzard walking down the road, and I was trying to get home. I was trying to get milk for the coffee shop, and this guy's walking, and I thought, I don't know who this is, but I'm just going to hold my phone to the side with 911 pushed and see what's going on. And the snow was built up over his eyelashes so bad that he could barely close his eyes and open his eyes. And I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Yeah, I just don't have a car and I'm just trying to get home." And I said, "Well, can I call someone for you?" And after about 5 minutes of conversation, I said, "Well, you know what? It's a snowstorm. Get in the car." And I said, "Where are you headed?" And he said, "Well, you probably don't know. It's a little town called Gridley." And I said, "Oh, sure, I live in Gridley." And he said, "Well, it's actually outside of town. It's 2 miles over at the west." And I said, "Oh, okay, this is sounding familiar. Where at?" He said, "Well, it's 1750. And I said, "That's my road." And he said, "Well, I'm about halfway up the road." And I said, "Are you Mike?" He said, "Yeah." A guy I'd never met before, who'd met Kyle, lived on our road and moved into our town, in our area, his neighborhood. So I got to meet him and had a half-hour drive back with him to his place. So it's nice to be unassuming and assume everyone is out for the good, and it's been really fun to get to know people through that. And we've also are very well traveled. I think that's helped internationally. I got to go to Zambia and Haiti, stay at a lot of different missions and organizations, and we went to New Zealand as a couple, and we loved couch surfing, hostels, and we loved that environment of people just being able to crash and get to know each other and be cooking beside each other and from 2 different countries, and you're talking about different cultures and getting to know each other over food and couch and games, and we love that culture. So I think that's something that we loved to do here as well, and to be able to bring that back a little bit from our travels.
I love the giving people the benefit of the doubt thing. We need so much more of that in our world. Everyone's so fearful, assuming that people are just out to get them and, they'll hurt me or rob me, and that's so rarely the case. We need more people like you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I wonder if anybody else is wondering what I'm wondering, and my geography's horrible. Where is Zambia?
It's a little bit north of South Africa. So it's in the African west side, close to, in Zambia, there's Victoria Falls, one of the 7 wonders of the world. I actually have never been there, but it's close to kind of Madagascar and some of those countries.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah. It was actually through Gobina Coffee's umbrella organization, Lifesong, which we now sell, and we donate, or we're able to work together with them, with Lifesong, in order to, give back to the organization. I don't know how to say it. Anyhow, it's fun because 10, 15 years ago, I was able to go there not knowing that we would have a coffee shop and be able to work directly with Lifesong. So it's really fun.
What are some of the more interesting figures that you've hosted? I think we talked. You guys gave us a couple of stories last night. What are your highlights of the travelers that you've taken in?
Man, we've hosted some really awesome people. Probably one of the first ones was Andrew Cease. If I'm thinking chronologically, we were introduced to a guy who was trying to circumnavigate the world on foot. And he'd already been through Mongolia, and he had, obviously you can't walk across the ocean, so he was in a boat, but the boat got crashed by a whale, got wrecked. That was poor grammar. Got wrecked by a whale, and he survived, and then he made it to America, and he was walking, and so just his stories were very unique. We've hosted a guy named Paul Wheeler, who was from the UK and had a military background, and I don't remember his motivation originally for running across the nation, but he was literally just planning to run from the Golden Gate to New York City. And he did it. And I don't know if he set a record or not, but just a super unique personality. And I feel like every time we've hosted somebody, their perspective has always encouraged me to consider the world as a bigger place. It's very easy to get into our own little world, our own little bubbles, and anytime somebody is, especially when they're traveling across or their goal is travel, they tend to have a perspective that is much bigger than mine, because I'm working at a job that's 7 miles from my house, and I stay within kind of this zone of travel, and my world can get pretty small if I let it.
Yeah.
Whereas people bring really fresh perspective of I just came from Missouri, or I just came from Ohio, and the people out there were this way, or we noticed this trend. So I feel like you have some fun stories from the Airbnb as far as the Korean?
South Koreans that had been through North Korea.
Yeah.
Delivering Bibles. It was a very interesting perspective. A husband and wife and their daughter stayed with us through Airbnb. We had no idea who they were when we agreed to it, and here they had all these stories about going through North Korea and being very close to the border and very passionate about these people that are living in very rough conditions. It was really interesting. We also kept 6 Filipino teachers that were here from Chicago to where are they going? San Francisco Bridge as well?
They were going to run the San Francisco Marathon.
That's right.
So they'd flown into Chicago and they rented a van. Or a car even. There were 6 of them. They were all packed in a vehicle.
A very small vehicle.
And they were planning to run a marathon when they got to San Francisco. So they were taking Route 66 and traveling across.
And it was their first experience in the United States. So it was really fun. They fly into Chicago. 2 hours later, they're in our home. And it's welcome, to the United States. And here we are. And to be that very first, to have the opportunity to welcome them.
Hopefully we set the expectation correctly.
Yeah. And we started feeding them. And they were,
Yeah.
And they were like, "Oh, your food is so heavy. We're like, you use a lot of butter." We're like, "Sorry, we're not used to
making butter and salt and cheese." Yeah,
welcome to America.
You do actually. You're right.
And you can get used to that.
Yeah,
that's
right?
how it's going to be.
Oh yeah.
what would you say to the people who are afraid to invite travelers into their homes, that are, they're really afraid of what could come out on the other side of that kind of action?
Do you have any thoughts? From my perspective, first of all, fear is a real thing, and fear is always valid to a point. And so having fear towards keeping strangers is understandable and reasonable. I think where fear is unhealthy is when it limits us from being open to relationship. And even if it's maybe not hosting somebody in your house, but just making a connection is a great place to start. Being willing to stop and talk to somebody and figure out who they are or what they're doing, to recognize them as a person. And if it leads to them staying at your house, wonderful, if that helps that person out. But even just being willing to make that connection. And if somebody has never hosted anybody in their home before, that could feel really scary, I would think. Mm-hmm. But even just being willing to be like, hey, can I take you out for supper? And I'll buy a hotel room. We've done that before too, where there was somebody walking and it was getting really, really cold, and just through some sense, it was like, I don't know if we'd be comfortable hosting this person, but we were more than glad to get them a meal and to sit with them, learn about them, and get them a hotel. There was, we've got a bunch of hotels in El Paso that it was like, we're glad. I don't think they were very comfortable with the idea of us hosting them. I think we mentioned come stay with us, or something along that, and they were like, and so just reading the signs, it's like, hey, we'll get you a hotel room, we don't want you outside in the cold, and they're like, oh, that's great. So whether somebody dives into hosting or not, I think it's important to at least dive into the relationship side, because like you've mentioned, there is a lot of disconnect in the world, and being connected is, in my opinion, one of God's gifts. He desires relationship with us, and we should desire relationship with each other.
Yeah, you have to learn a little trust just for the bare minimum of making new friends.
Right.
And you'll never get to practice feeling people out and getting a good, what's the right word or phrase for that? Getting a good feel of people, getting in touch with that.
And their perspectives and why they are in the situation they're in, for whatever reason they're in.
You shouldn't assume the worst.
Exactly. Yeah.
I would say we even develop empathy more empathy is generated by getting to know a greater variety of people, and we can come to understand that not everybody lives their lives in this within this narrow corridor of what society expects out of them, and they can still be really fantastic people, really interesting people, and insightful people. They're not necessarily always just looking to live off of the hard work and labor of others.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Very true.
So all day today I've been drinking the coffee that you guys roast, and I got absolutely cracked out on caffeine. I was thinking to myself, I don't actually know the coffee process. I've never looked into it, and it's one of
our obsessions, you might say.
It is our greatest vice, me and Paige.
Sure.
So what actually happens? If you could walk me through the process from if you know about what happens at the actual harvest, how beans are grown, all the way down to where it makes its way into our cups.
Sure. Yeah, so I'll probably give a medium level view, because there's a lot of detail that we could talk about. I don't want to kill a ton of time. Don't want it to be boring for your listeners. But basically, coffee is a cherry. So if you picture it growing on a tree, and what we drink is the pit, or the seed in the center. And so generally there's a specific set of latitudes that coffee is grown between. That's where it grows most effectively. There are coffee farms in America, but that coffee is not considered commercial. It's high-end, premium grade, because it's hard to grow it here. So coffee you drank this morning was from Nicaragua, and it was grown, it would have been crop year 2022. I don't believe we have 2023 in stock yet. But all the coffee that we purchase is like year crop, 1 year, and so it's very fresh. The coffee itself is from a tree. They take the cherry, and when it reaches a ripe point, it's like bright red. Most of the coffee all is harvested by hand, so it's pretty labor intensive. And they're picking for specific ripeness. So they're looking at the cherry. If it's green, it's not ripe. If it's orange, it's getting there. Yellow, kind of a scale, all the way up to like bright red. And then after red, there's like purple and other colors where it's rotting and it's past prime. And so they're picking the cherry, collecting it. They're taking it to a processing center where the pulp will either be stripped or like pulverized or crushed. And then from there, it'll either get washed completely off or it'll get left on to sun dry. And that'll create different flavors depending on how long the fruit is left on it. And then from there, that coffee gets bagged up. And you can buy coffee on the market commercially anywhere from as locally as what they consider direct trade. So if I went to the farmer and I said, I need to buy 1,000 pounds this year, that's direct trade. And he would import it, or I would import it to America, and I would roast it. And I would say Farmer XYZ, coffee farm. That's very specific coffee. And then there's as broad of a market as just buying it literally where you have no idea even what farm it's from or what region it's from. It's from Sumatra. And so it's a very broad category. Where Gobina lands, we are a co-op purchaser, so except for one bean, we buy directly from a farm. But basically, the co-ops we work with try to blend the best of both worlds, that you have 5, 10, 15 small farms all bringing their product to one place to process and clean it up, bag it up, and then that allows them to reach larger purchasers versus if I have 5 pounds of coffee to sell. Some companies will not even consider me because they need 10 or 20 or 50. So if you've got 10 farmers with 5 pounds, now you have 50 pounds that you can take it to that person, and it helps the quality. So we buy co-op coffee. It comes to us in burlap bags, 150 pounds at a time. Very large product. 10 bags per pallet, and we usually get anywhere from 10 to 20 pallets every month or two. So it comes into us. It's stored from the co-op. It gets shipped over, gets imported to the United States into a kind of the American side that does the purchasing. We purchase it and allocate it from that group on the East Coast, and then they ship it to us. And then from there, we take it and roast it in like 25-pound batches. So it's considered a very small batch. There are roasters out there that'll do 500 pounds, 1,000 pounds at a time. And there's also roasters that'll do a half pound at a time. So that's considered like micro. We're a small batch roaster, and we're still considered hand controlled. So we do have some computerization that helps us keep the coffee roast kind of in check, so it doesn't get too far out of line. But we set up all the profiles, and we control it each batch. We turn the heat up, and we change the fan speed. So that coffee comes in green, and it looks like a soybean or like a peanut that is not dried. So if you guys ever had like raw peanuts that have not been dried at all, pretty dense and chewy. It's kind of like that. It's a very dense, chewy, pretty high moisture. And we take it, it goes into the roaster, and a bunch of heat's applied, dries it out, also caramelizes it and changes the sugars inside to create sweetness and flavor. And then it gets dumped into a cooling tray where it cools off from 400 degrees down to room temperature in like a minute or two. The goal is to stop it like a hard-boiled egg. You're trying to stop the cooking, same theory. And then we take it and we bag it up. All the coffee that Gobina sells is fresh roasted, so we don't stock up 500 pounds and then wait for orders. We receive orders as they come in and then roast that coffee for that order and then send it out. Yeah. So it's a pull system. A lot of manufacturers use a push system. They create a bunch of product and push it out to their distributors. We're the opposite. We will only produce product that's been requested. I'm trying to think if there's any steps in the process that I missed.
Well, maybe I should ask, what do you think makes a good cup of coffee? What separates the good roasters from the mediocre or even bad roasters?
Oh man, that's a great question.
I'll say, in my own personal opinion, I feel like Starbucks is over-roasted. It seems bordering on charcoal at times.
Sure. Oh, sorry. You have any thoughts as a coffee? So, as a coffee shop owner, I bet you have some opinions.
Yeah, the fresh roasted for sure. That's definitely something that we order it on Monday. Our coffee shop orders it Monday morning, and it arrives Monday night. So it has been roasted that day, and then I use it Tuesday through Saturday at the shop, and then start all over again the next week. So I believe it does give us a little bit of a edge in the market to be able to have a really fresh roasted coffee. And we don't have to wait for it to be shipped. Ours is local, and so we just go get it, and they drop it off, and we have it the next day. So it is really nice to be able to have high quality product, very fresh quality product.
That's so great. Katrina really did serve us frappuccinos when we first got there after a long hot day.
Oh yes.
And it was the best frappuccino I've ever had. Their coffee is fantastic.
Thank you. You know, we're very spoiled too because we have a local dairy right down the road.
Yeah.
Oh.
And every Tuesday they deliver 60 to 80 gallons of milk. So it comes from these Jersey cows that you literally can watch them producing the milk, and the next day we can be serving that at our shop. So in addition to having local products, like for our food and drinks, I mean, we can have the really creamy Jersey cow milk. So that does also add that, and mixed with the coffee. It's like the perfect drink. We've traveled quite a bit, and everywhere we go, we hit up 20 coffee shops along the way, and I think we are pretty blessed to be able to have a good quality product available to us very local in the Heartland.
The fact that both of those are fresh has to just
exactly
make the difference between you guys and other people.
I would also say
coffees.
there's a big difference in the quality of coffee that can be bought. So you can buy different grades of coffee, and that has a big part in how it's coming out. So a higher grade coffee generally has less like defects in it, like either before roasting or after roasting. And defects would be like if the bean was cracked, and then it's going to roast differently than a whole bean. Or defects after roasting would be like if the roast was uneven and one part of the bean was darker than the other. And so any and all defect ends up taking away from the overall quality of that cup of coffee. And so if you have, say 0 to 10 defects per 100 pounds, that's going to be a very high quality coffee. If you have 10 to 100 defects, it's lower quality, 100 to 1,000 per pound. Each bean is going to add to the overall whole of that bag of coffee. So having a good starting product and a higher grade going in produces a higher product coming out.
Your roastery has a pretty interesting story from what I understand. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, Gobina Coffee was originally started as a namesake. So the name Gobina is a person's name, and this person is a farmer from Ethiopia, and he was out in his field one day, and he heard a child crying, a very small child, and so he went kind of exploring or trying to figure out, investigating, and found a newly born child under a tree, like in the shade, like it had been placed there. And the child was alive and crying, and Gobina picked the child up and took the baby back to his wife Mulanesh and said, like, I just found this baby. What do we do? We're like 70 years old. Can't take care of a baby. So they got a bunch of community help to like try to help this baby for a little bit, and they realized like we can't, we're too old. And so they walked the baby to the nearest police station, which was quite a ways away, turned the baby over, and the baby got put into a child care facility. And about that same time as that was happening, there was a family in central Illinois who really felt called to adopt, and they felt called to Ethiopia. And they had gone through the adoption application process, had gotten approved by the Ethiopian government, and got matched with this little girl from Ethiopia. And, they didn't know the story about Gobina. And so they go over and they pick up their little girl. They come back, and they're very entrepreneurial people. and they wanted to do something to help with adoption for other people. They felt very, very blessed to be able to adopt someone, and they said, hey, if we can help others do this is a good thing. Let's help fundraise. And so in doing some research, they realized their little girl's story about Gobina, and at the same time, Ethiopia is known for coffee, and it's like the kind of the birthplace of coffee originally. And they said, hey, let's make a coffee company and name it after the man that rescued our child, because the perspective is that adoption can be a rescue. Not that we are better or saving people. Like, that's not the heart of adoption, is not to save someone. But it is just an opportunity. And so they created this company called Gobina Coffee in namesake of Gobina. And they had a local roaster who would roast up 10 pounds at a time, 20 pounds at a time, 30 pounds at a time. And then they would bag it in 12-ounce bags and sell it, and all the profit would get put into an account that people could apply to and say, hey, we're looking to adopt. It's very expensive. Could we get a gift? And then they would gift some money out from that account. And it just continued to grow to the point that they were doing it out of their living room every night of the week. Well, like 5 nights a week, and they were just overwhelmed with it, and it had just grown to the point that they had coffee, like boxes of coffee sitting everywhere to be backed up, and they just couldn't. They realized that it was a good thing, but not for them. And so they had affiliations with the group you mentioned earlier, Life Song for Orphans, and that was a not-for-profit that works with orphan care and vulnerable children organizations across the world. And it was a family member relative that works there. And he said, do you think Lifesong would ever be interested in like absorbing Gobina coffee to make it more efficient and make it more effective versus us bagging in our living room? And at that time, the family member was like, well, yeah. I mean, I think it's a great fit. It's a good story. You guys have obviously done a really good job making this something successful for a good purpose. It's not like this profit-driven money-hungry scheme. It was, we just want to raise money for adoption. So Lifesong took it over and absorbed it into house and just continued to grow. And then Luke Goodeman moved home from the mission field. He was in Zambia, and kind of took it by the horns and said, hey, let's continue to grow this thing to the point that that we can continue to raise even more funds. The big change happened when we bought our own roaster and really started diving into the quality side of coffee, and realized that fundraising is a very good thing, but it shouldn't be the end goal or the only reason we're doing this. So Gobina shifted gears into a really coffee-centric company, focusing on the quality of coffee, focusing on the customer care, going from having like 3 roast profiles to 5, and then to 10 and 17, and I think we're up to like 33 types of coffee that you could purchase from us. And each one of those has just kind of grown out of a need. We need more dark roast, or we need, it'd be really fun to have a Congo coffee, so we find these little coffees that we add. So now, to wrap that up, we went from having 50-pound, 100-pound batches to, on average, we roast 1,000 to 3,000 pounds a day, 5 days a week, out of the small town of Gridley.
I love that it started just the nonprofit focus, and I guess everyone was like, well, we should probably focus on making good coffee so we can actually raise money. You gotta start there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We had people give us
free
feedback
coffee.
multiple times. We love supporting the cause, but originally the coffee was okay. But people would say, like, we'll buy it once or twice, but it's not the coffee we're going to drink every day.
Yeah.
And it
was
resonated with
supportive.
Luke. Yeah, it resonated with Luke, like, we should just be the coffee they drink every day.
Right.
And then it's going to generate cash flow for the business,
Yeah.
for the not-for-profit. And it was like, oh, just make good coffee and people will buy it. So it was a big turning point.
So if people want to buy Gobina's coffee, what can they do? Where can they go?
Well, Common Grounds supplies. Common Grounds Cafe and Pie Shop in Gridley, Illinois supplies, 15, 20 different kinds?
Yeah, so there's local vendors all across the nation. There's cafes that use our product in Connecticut, Ohio, Georgia.
But they do have a very nice website.
Yeah. So if there's not a cafe local that you could buy it from, you could also go on the website at gobena.org. Gobena is Gobena. So it's kind of like Gobena, but it's not like a coffee bean. It's Gobena. So.
Yeah. To the listeners, I highly recommend their coffee, and it's for a good cause too. So,
thank you.
I recommend trying it.
Appreciate it.
And I would highly recommend going to Common Grounds if you're ever in the Gridley area.
Oh yeah.
Because it's like the best coffee shop I've ever been in. Even like your decorations and all of that stuff, it's beautiful inside. I mean, it looks like something that you would find in Denver, not in a little town with like 1,500 people or something. Yeah, gorgeous coffee shop, guys.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Something's come up during the podcast a couple of times, and of course it did last night. God seems to be a pretty big part of your life, and this is one of the things I like to talk about. How differently do you think your life would look if you didn't have your faith?
Good question.
Deep question.
I'll let you think about it. So, going back for my history, so I grew up in a Christian family, and I was actually adopted at 5 weeks old. So adoption's a big part of my life also, and it's a big part of my story. And that had been presented to me from the day that I can remember. I've always known I was adopted, and my parents have always shared that in a way that it was a very what's the word I'm looking for? It was very God ordained. My parents lost. My parents had a child named Trent, had a boy, and then they had a little girl, and she passed away after 12 weeks. Then they had a little boy, and he passed away after like 2 weeks. And so they had just a lot of trauma and a lot of sadness, and yet they still felt called to a family, and they felt like a single child for them was lacking. And I'm not in their shoes. I don't know how they prayed about it and how they felt that conviction, but they felt called to adoption. They felt like a biological family was going to be challenging. The doctors had encouraged them that more than likely if you try to have another child, the child will probably have the same physical maladies that the first two did and will probably not survive, but there are other options to a family. And so they're like, okay, let's pray about adoption. So with that being said, it was always presented to me that your adoption was a gift and was God ordained. You know, God put you into our family. And that's where my faith started, that if my family can have really negative experiences and still have faith with God and have a belief in a higher power that wants the best, even through sadness like that there could be something to it. And from there have been some large experiences in my life that I feel very strongly about that have shown me God's existence and the idea of coincidence I've struggled with. As a young man, I always struggled with coincidence. Well, that's just a coincidence. And whether or not coincidence can happen, things like that. And so I hit a deer on a motorcycle when I was 19. And after that experience, somebody challenged me to try to do the math on the odds of that happening. I was at a church event that I had left at like 10 p.m. and I jumped on the bike, and a deer jumped out in front of me, and I smoked it. And I got to thinking, the person said, I'll give you 3 ideas to like try to pencil out the math. What if you had stayed 30 seconds later? What if you had gone a different route? And what if, what was the third one? Oh, what if you had changed your shoes? So I was wearing flip-flops when I wrecked the bike, and I had a pair of shoes with me that I had worn there on the motorcycle, and I didn't put them back on when I rode home. And it was just like, It just challenged me to believe that for me, there has to be more than coincidence. And at that time, my faith was pointed back to God, that God does have a plan, and that I could have died. I mean, I wasn't flying. I wasn't going 100 mile an hour. I was going speed limit like 45 or 50. But people die every day hitting objects and falling off motorcycles and everything else. And it was just very influential that I am not owner of myself. As much as I want to be in control, there are things that there are literally no control. Had I known that there was a deer there, I would have left 30 seconds later or gone a different, right? Like I would have done something to control that. If I couldn't control that. Okay, so if I don't have control, either no one does or someone does. And that was a big part of my faith journey, was knowing that either no one has control and I would struggle with that, or someone must have control, and that's a higher power, God. I don't know the original question, but that's where I just landed.
How differently do you think your life would look if you didn't have the faith that you have? So maybe like bringing it back around to the idea of control, imagining that you didn't believe necessarily that God was in control, how would that affect your life? And same to you, Katrina, you know, how would your life look if you didn't have the faith that you have?
That is a very convicting question, because personally, for me, I'm a very emotional person. I'm a very empathetic person. I'm driven by a lot of my experiences, past experiences. I can't handle people hurting. I don't know if you guys noticed, I have a very long a scar on my arm, and I was burnt by coffee when I was 2. And it led me to the hospital for a long time. I was having skin grafts done, and because of that, I am a very empathetic person to people in pain, and just people in hurting, and people that have scars in general, whether it's physical or if it's, you know, scars from their past, from abuse or whatever it may be. And I feel like as an empathetic person and as someone who is driven by that, I do feel like God has given us different gifts and talents, and I've been able to use that talent that God's given me. Obviously, it's also it's a blessing and a kind of a curse, in that I'm not able to do a lot of things like that people can do because I don't know how to handle it. But I can relate maybe a little bit better. I can just have a different understanding. And I have things where, going back to the original question, I feel very led by things in a different way than Kyle. Kyle's very fact driven. He has to know right, left, yes, no, cold, hot, and I'm this middle ground where things are very warm and flowery and very painful and dark and hard. And I've had a really blessed life. I've been able to see a lot of hurt from different situations in third world countries and things where I've been blessed to be able to have a different perspective than the average person maybe that hasn't been able to see that. Or I'm thankful. Like every time my water turns on in the morning, I'm like, praise God, there's water. Whereas I've seen it where it's maybe people have had to not have clean water or whatever it may be. But going back to the question about what my life would be like had I not had a relationship with Christ and my Lord, I don't know where I would be, because I wouldn't have that care for people and the relationship, like wanting to understand people. And I feel so led so many times to just do something. I'm like, where did that come from? And it's just like seeing you guys on the side of the road. There's no way I could have driven past you. I would have had to have stopped. Like, I felt like God said, stop and ask them where they're staying tonight, because you don't know where this is going to go. And right or wrong, it's what I had to do. And that's so many times with us. Kyle's like, what do you think? And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. I'm all in. Like, we're going. We got to do this, because I feel led to do it. And I know that that's not just of me. I know it's from something else. And I hate the fact that I have to say it's faith and not something in front of me. Like, I can't say it is written down, or, it's like, it's a feeling. It's something that is inside of me that has moved me. And I I know it's right, and I know he's there. And not having that, I don't even know where I'd be. I don't know how that I would survive. So as a very emotional person and a different perspective, I love the fact that my faith leads me to do what we do, and I hope I'm a better person for that.
Paige and I have bumped into the actions generated by faith, and I mean, this being a fantastic example, we're very happy that you invited us into your home, and here you are now on our podcast.
Thank you.
I just have to pause for a second and ask, did you say that it was coffee that led to that burn?
Yes.
And here you are.
Isn't that crazy?
Right? Facing your demons head on, looking
Yes.
right into the eyes of the devil.
Every day I serve coffee. It has actually been really good because having the scar, I feel like people see me a little bit more relatable. Mm-hmm. And it is something like, oh, you obviously have a situation that has happened in your past. Like, sometimes I actually almost like am thankful that I can say, hey, look, I've had this happen to me. It's okay. You're going to be okay. Yeah. I made it, or whatever it may be. But like, it's definitely a part of my past, and it's a hard part, but it's a growing and good part too.
So, one of the things that was actually fairly interesting about your faith is that your denomination isn't one that we've bumped into yet.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about the history last night and what it is, but maybe you could just give us a rundown. What's your denomination, and how is it different from other denominations historically?
Sure.
You better answer this one. I'm the emotional side, remember?
So we are part of the Apostolic Christian Church of America, and it's an offshoot of the Anabaptist movement. And historically, most of our congregation has ties to Eastern Europe and Germany and Switzerland. The founding father was Samuel Freilich. He was the original. He would be the person that we would probably look back to as far as historical roots. And he came to the East Coast. And I'm not as familiar as I should be, but the main gist of the movement itself was, basically rebaptizing as an adult, making a conscious choice for baptism versus infant baptism and state church run religion, and things that make us different, or make us maybe different is a strong term, but things that we hold dear or make us that we value. We would value a profession of faith in Jesus Christ. We value that the Bible is the inerrant Word of God. We would value full submersion baptism if possible, and just the practice of baptism as an adult, that it's a conscious choice and it's an outward expression of faith. We have a very strong culture of the term repentance, which is familiar to some and not familiar to others, but the idea that as a person, we've all been created in the image of God, but we've all sinned, and then that sin puts us at enmity or odds with God, and repenting is the process of agreeing with that I am a sinner, and then turning from that sin. And it does not mean that you're instantly perfect, but it means that you are making conscious choices and decisions by the grace of God to honor Him and to sin no more if possible. We definitely don't believe that you're perfect after you repent. I think that's a topic that people can weave through, but other things that are important to us. We are a fairly traditional denomination. We have all lay pastors, so all of our pastors are elected from the body, the church body.
No seminary, you mean?
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay.
Yep. No seminary. Yep. Yeah. And generally 5 to 10 pastors per congregation, so that it's a shared load.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
How many in a congregation?
Anywhere from 5 people to biggest, like I actually grew up in one of the largest congregations in the denomination. Is probably 1,200 on an average Sunday.
Wow.
So a large assembly.
I think what's kind of neat about the congregation itself is the community. It's a lot more
very
of
community.
I know every single person in our 500 member church, and I could tell you who's related to who, and how many kids they have, and it's a blessing because being in a small community and then having a very tight knit church, not only is the what's it called when you're looking out for each other, you're keeping track, you're making sure accountability. The accountability is there as far as just like I know that people are there that are going to keep me on track, and I'm going to keep them on track. Yeah. Not in a way like,
not in a negative way, but just in a support role.
Oh, yeah. Right. Like, hey, are you doing okay? Can I help you out with something? I see your kids are driving you crazy. Can I take them off can I bring you a meal? It's a very tight-knit group, and even within the denomination, what's really beautiful about it is getting to know someone like Kyle 8 years before we even got married through our different church get-togethers. And knowing that, he
we would have very similar shared values. Yeah.
It was kind of a blessing. And you never know, you don't know what people are really like when they close their doors at night, but having at least some idea that he believed in a lot of the same things I did.
Mm-hmm. Something that goes back to the community point she was talking about. The Apostolic Christian Church of America generally practices a shared lunch every Sunday. So that comes back from the days that, everybody was either walking or riding a horse and buggy to church, and they'd have a service, and then it was like what do you do? It felt too small, and you only saw these people once a week. They wanted to sit together, so it's like, well, let's have lunch, and then somebody got the idea that, well, if we're going to have a service and lunch, let's hear more of the Word of God, so we'll have another service. And so that is actually the same exact rhythm we have today, where it's we gather. Church doors open at 9:30. Well, they're open at 9 or 8:30 or whenever the ushers get there. But people tend to get there like 9:30. We start our song service, which our song service is a cappella, so no instruments. It's usually led by a group of guys. Song service, and then the message, and then lunch, and then the same exact thing again in the afternoon after lunch, and it creates community. We have such a tight-knit group because you're going to be able to spend an hour, whether it's with a single person that, hey, I wanted to catch up with them, or you mingle and you get to see people that, maybe I don't get to see everybody every week.
And it's nice, too, because people can come from, maybe they are not comfortable in a church, but they'll be comfortable sitting and eating a meal. Yeah. So it hopefully invites people to come in and not feel uncomfortable maybe as much as they would have. Yeah. A meal always kind of helps.
It is way less assuming. Yeah. Like, it is so nice to just sit and eat a donut with somebody. Most of the time it's donuts.
We've seen that a lot, I agree.
Neat.
The more communal churches often have something to gather over after the fact.
Sure.
And when everyone just disperses right away, how do you get to know your fellow church members and create that community?
Yep, for sure.
And one of the things that we learned last night about your faith is that you're actually a denomination that was, or you're basically a schism from the Anabaptists. Mm-hmm. We're within the Anabaptists.
Yeah.
And it seems like from what Paige and I are coming to learn is that Anabaptists do have this very central focus on community. Yes. Obviously the Mennonites, Amish, Anabaptists, and you guys as well, although maybe a bit more contemporary without the buttons and stuff.
Wear your buttons, Kyle.
So, just a couple of questions before we close the podcast. We've got about 10 minutes left. What would you say is the best formula for contentment? If you could sum up your life's wisdom into this question right here.
Oh, my.
Oh, man. Best formula for contentment.
I guess having not pre-thought about this question. I guess not being too settled in one place, both in your mind and your physical body. Being very available and willing to try new things and and being also content with what you have. And that's very, very general, like in every aspect of that question. And like I said, with just feeling led to do things, I really do feel like God has a specific calling, and fulfilling that calling is probably the greatest contentment, whether it is what I want to do personally or not. Being able to be willing to do whatever needs to be done for the greater good. And that's so satisfying at the end of the day, knowing. There's a quote from C.S. Lewis that says, if I find in myself...
I find in myself a longing for which this world cannot satisfy.
There's the logical explanation is I was made for another world. And so many times in this world I get frustrated. Sorry.
We'll work on that.
It still sounds quite pretty.
But there's so many times when there's just nothing that truly, I mean, we're called to be pilgrims passing through. And we are here. We are in this world, and this world is corrupt and messy and hard. But, if getting people to heaven, is the end goal, then that's what we're called to do. And this world is hard, and knowing that it's not our home, and we're going to be in heaven someday is, the goal. Then making this world, this world doesn't have to be, our life doesn't have to be perfect, and things are messy and things happen, and it's, it makes it easier to find contentment.
I would say similarly, for me, contentment to me is when I can recognize that my life is not my own, and when I can have a pretty clear focus on my purpose. That's when I'm most content. On the inverse, when I'm most discontent is when I'm selfish, or when I'm inward focused, or if I feel like I've been slighted.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and those things, frustration in relationships are real, and you do have to live in a world with people, so you have to navigate that. But what I'm reminded by my faith is that my life is not my own, and I'm submitting to Christ, and He calls me to live a godly life. And if that means being slighted by somebody because I know that this is a short life and it's not worth raising a big deal about, take the short end of the stick and move on. I can live knowing that I don't always have to win. I don't always have to come out on top. It's not about me. It's not. So for me, contentment comes with proper perspective of the long term, the big picture, and not the 100-year picture, not the 1,000-year. It's the million-year picture.
Isn't it such a strangely counterintuitive thing that egocentric thought, which should technically be serving ourselves, and you would think thereby making ourselves happier, it actually doesn't work that way. And yet when we give of ourselves selflessly, that's where the real joy comes from.
Yeah.
And a final question here. If you imagine this podcast would reach every person in the world.
Oh boy.
What one thought would you like to convey to everybody?
So for me personally, if this podcast could reach everyone in the world, I would just ask people to consider their lives, ask them to consider creation and the idea that we are created, and that if we are created, then there is purpose, and what that purpose is. I would ask them to consider Jesus Christ. We talked a little bit last night about people that maybe have never been able to hear the name of Jesus and how Christians view that and things like that. And I think if we could get this to everyone and I could say the name of Jesus, that could spark some ideas. But in all seriousness, that is also my heart cry. Because Jesus was a real person, undeniably. And I just want people to know that. And then they can make their own decisions. We have the ability of free choice. And so I would want people to just consider Jesus.
And I would say that in a really hurting world where there's a lot of abuse and loneliness and heartache and sadness, and people, like you said, have been slighted, just to know that they really truly are loved. They were created and loved by a God who loves them, and that they can take hope that there is someone who is out there looking for some, a God who loves them and created them. And even if people have let them down, they are loved, and we are all loved.
Seems like there are far few better things to share with the world than love.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, we'll close on that note. Thanks, guys, for joining us today. Kyle, Katrina. If you enjoyed this content, you can donate through one of the links on our website, walkingamericacouple.com. Or, as always, find us on the road somewhere and talk at us until you feel like we deserve money. Thanks, America.